All right, everybody, we are back. I have to say, we've been having really good responses to our series about the different roles that someone can play in Star Trek Adventures. And so we're going to keep it rolling. Got that? Did you get that? This week, I'm Michael Dismuke, freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures RPG, in addition to being a blogger on Continuing Missions, which is the #1 fan site for Star Trek Adventures. And of course, as usual, we have my lovely co-host, Jim Johnson. Why don't you start us out and introduce our other guests today?
Hey, everybody. I am Jim Johnson. I am the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, published by Modiphius Entertainment lo these many years, heading into year 7 here, I think year 8, something like that. I don't know. I've lost track. Many years now. We've been doing this game as long as Next Gen and DS9 and Voyager were on the air, and we're heading out beyond that now. So it's pretty exciting. Uncharted territory here. So this is super cool. I am here to co-host this here show along with Michael, and we have 2 fabulous guests with us tonight. So I will introduce them. They'll introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about themselves. And what's our first topic tonight? Is it
our topic is about conn on Helm officers, however you want to call them, navigators, and all that good stuff.
All right, so conn flight officers, helmsmen, whatever. So introduce yourself and then tell us who your favorite helm/conn officer is. And Sky, why don't you get us going here?
I'm Sky, and I am super fan. And my favorite Helm officer is easily Thomas Eugene Paris. Hi, Riker.
Yeah. Is that your cat named Riker?
My cat. Yeah, his name is Riker.
I think Riker agrees.
Riker. Yes.
Tom Paris. Fantastic.
Right. Awesome. Thank you, Sky. And Al, tell us a little bit about yourself and who your favorite conn/helmsman is.
How's it going? Al Spader. I'm a freelance writer for Star Trek Adventures. Also GM lots of different games on the weekends. And I'm going to echo back Tom Paris. And I think it has, as we're going to get into, it has more to do with the character and how they address the role than just the role itself.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Al. And Michael, just for the sake of completion, who's your favorite helmsman/conn officer?
You know, I thought about
person,
this.
I guess helms person and conn officer, flight controller. I guess would be more appropriate.
Okay, yeah, our flight controller. Honestly, Tom Paris I'm a big Voyager fan, but when it came down to it, I cannot ever get Sulu out of my mind. I mean, Sulu. Just classic Helms person. And of course, just because of his succession to captain, and he was so kick butt in my favorite movie, Star Trek, the 6, Undiscovered Country. He came in, and when I think about him as a flight controller, I think about him when they said, if we fly her this fast, we'll break her apart. He's like, break her apart then. He just knew what his ship could do. And that was just the ultimate heroic moment. So Sulu gets it for me. What about you, Jim?
Yeah, I've got to agree with you. I think just thinking about all the series like Next Gen, DS9 just didn't have really a consistent flight officer, right, in that spot from season to season. And I liked Paris, as a character, but I think the prototypical flight controller that I had in my mind when I was writing the command source book, and really emphasizing how the conn officer, in my opinion anyway, is really a person of all trades, and is a very good place to be multitasking and have a lot of different things going on. That's not just being the flight controller or the astrometrics and that kind of stuff. So I think Sulu is great because Sulu was such a well-rounded character in addition to being the Helms person. And he's just a neat character. And even aside from George Takei, playing him, I think Sulu, partly because also Sulu is a good example of a role-playing game character who progressed from season to season and then into the movies, eventually getting his own command, which is super cool because you can absolutely emulate that in Star Trek Adventures. without really any difficulty. There you go. Yeah, and
I think both
that story.
Sky and Al's characters did the same. And my inner geek just kicked me in the butt. By the way, it wasn't breaker apart; it's flyer apart. I just heard it and I said that just didn't sound right. So I just want to correct that before I get hate mail or something.
Yeah. All right. Cool. All right. So I think the last bunch of episodes we've done Doctor, Captain, First Officer. Just like those episodes, we're going to talk about what makes the flight controller super awesome. And I guess Al, would probably be appropriate to talk to you first, because you wrote the chapter in the player's guide, right? And as with the other episodes, if you haven't watched them yet, folks, go check them out if there's a role that you really like and are curious about. But I encourage Al, tell us why this role is awesome and how, who's suited for this kind of role. So Al, I want you to tell us a little bit about what you were thinking when you wrote that section.
Yeah. It was very interesting because I had played my main character was a flight controller. So I really dove into this section and I did a lot of research and actually took some stuff that I wanted to put in this section and pushed it off to Utopia Planitia that I had learned along the way. But it was interesting to look at, from the olden days of Trek where you had a separate navigator to when it kind of became an all combined role, as we got into the 24th century. So, I talked about that in there and how, computing became so advanced that it was really something that could be done by only one person and someone that wasn't as high a rank necessarily as some of the other jobs on the ship. And then I also had to take into consideration, we talk about a flight controller and how they pilot a ship and maneuver it around and deal with obstacles and things like that. But how is that position different on a starbase as opposed to on a starship, right? Where it's probably more of some type of management type job, guiding, different docking bays and things like that. So that's really the direction that I went was, how can this job be seen across multiple eras and multiple different locations?
I want to ask a question since you mentioned it too. So suppose people are playing in the era of TOS, because again, in Enterprise, the NX-01, we see that there was one flight controller, Mayweather, right? And then all of a sudden we see what would be about roughly 100 years later, when there's supposed to be advancement, helm and navigation. So what's the Star Trek lore about that? And how are those roles differently in case people are playing it? Because I know in the game I'm GMing now, tabletop Star Trek RPG, we now have a helm officer and a navigator. And they're like, well, aren't these overlapping? So can we talk about that to clarify how people could best utilize those roles?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing here is when we start talking about astrometrics and location and who's responsible for charting a course in a larger scale, as opposed to who might be in charge of maneuvering the ship under impulse, attack patterns, defensive patterns, that type of stuff, I think is really where you start delineating the two. I always felt like navigation was a lot more science focused, whereas your helm flight controller is more almost like an engineering background. I felt like there was a little bit of a divide there.
Okay. Who fires the photon torpedoes? That's what everyone wants to know.
Well, at least in the original series, it was generally Chekhov more than anything else. So Sulu was the one flying the ship, and Chekhov was working really closely not hand in hand, but closely with him, literally right there, right next to each other, feeding information to him, but also managing the weapons and some of the other stuff. So I almost wonder. I mean, I'd have to go dig through the technical manuals to remember for sure, but I almost wonder if the helmsman was almost kind of a prototypical operations officer. In the original series, and then they kind of changed it around heading into next gen era. I think
because Chekhov definitely was operations and weapons, especially advanced into the movies,
right?
And security, very security focused too, right? Chekhov. So
operations definitely
tactical, almost like maybe navigation could be also tactical.
Certainly.
Yep. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Optimal positions and finding and tracking your opponent too, right? Or your adversary or whatever.
Yeah, something good to think about when you're setting up a TOS game, because this is my first time doing that. Setting up a movie era game is what we're playing, and all of a sudden I had to confront that, because TNG level games, you don't confront that. And so something to talk about for those of you who are playing TOS and getting players into those positions.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Now, primarily here, though, and Sky, correct me if I'm wrong, you're playing TNG era, right? Because that's the Odyssey behind you.
Yeah. TNG/STO, it basically works the same way, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, fantastic. So why don't we open it up to this then? Why are flight controllers so cool, and why would people want to pick it for their character? Why don't you start, Sky, with this one?
Okay, yeah. So I am biased here because I am a pilot in real life. I have a pilot's license. So when I came into the Star Trek Adventures game, my GM's like, okay, who wants to play what? I'm like, I'm a flight controller. I'm the flight controller, like smashing the button. So it's just kind of one of those things where I wanted to do it because I love flight. If you are into like Top Gun or aviation in general, or even just like ship handling, sailing or whatever, you're going to have a great time with the flight controller role.
Good. Jim, what about you? What's your take on it? And then Al, since you wrote the section.
Yeah, I think, gosh, and this is one of the things I appreciate about Mayweather. And I know a lot of people won't say that because like there was so little for him to do on the show, which is really unfortunate. And I think they underutilized that character just like they did a lot of other characters. But I think if you are like me and you are a super geek about the space program and about flight and about just flight dynamics and just like getting into the weeds about how the systems work and how they flew the ship and how they manage all those, like flight controller is such a great way to get into that, into the weeds. And then like Sky said, if you're into Top Gun, if you're into the Star Wars, what was that series called, Rogue Squadron, right? That whole, and Space Above and Beyond, Battlestar Galactica, like that whole flight deck shtick with the pilots doing the pilot thing, and you got the flight deck people doing their thing. Like I would love to figure out a way to get that into a Star Trek game and make it feel appropriate. And like unfortunately, the franchise just doesn't quite go in that angle, except maybe during the Dominion War, you could kind of make it fit with hoppers or something, or the small fighter craft that they use. But I love that concept, and I've done it a few times in Star Wars role playing games where you've got okay, everybody's a pilot and you're on a frigate and you're just doing different missions. It's like the old X-Wing video games, right? You're just doing constant missions. You're out there with the pilots doing the missions, and I'd love to do something like that with Star Trek. But that if you're into that kind of concept, that's what the flight controller is, really something that you can wrap your head around and play with. But at the same time, and I promise I'll stop. At the same time, the flight controller, like if you look at some of the characters on the shows, especially Riker, they all started as flight controllers and worked their way through the ranks, diversified their skill set, and then ended up in the center seat eventually, right? So there's a very clear career path for you. So if you're a player who wants to, actually, this is a good thing to talk about Star Trek Adventures, right? Is if you're a player and you're the type of player who wants a character who can advance, right, to level up and to gain rank and to gain experience, the flight controller is a really good one to do it, because you could start as an ensign or you could start as a Lieutenant JG, and over the course of your campaign, you can increase your skills, but also increase your rank and get more responsibility, change roles, do different things. And so I really try to encourage, I know Al, you touched on this in the player's guide, but even when I was working on the command source book, I really tried to emphasize that, like, if you're that kind of player, this is a good role for you, because this gives you that opportunity. Whereas if you're like playing the captain or the first officer, you're probably not going to get promoted over the course of the campaign, and you have to be okay with that, right? And a lot of players are okay with that, but you just have to find your reward in different ways. Whereas playing the flight officer, I think there's immediate opportunity for rewards, because you got a whole bunch of ranks you can gain and a whole bunch of skills and stuff that you can pick up on.
Good. And Al, you're the one who wrote the box, choose this role. If so, what's your take on it?
Yeah, one of the things that I found fascinating when I settled into the position was the concept of sure, like you're in control of this massive piece of equipment, right? It's almost like an extension of yourself. But at the same time, you also have like some management roles. Actually on the flight deck, working with, making sure that the shuttles are all working properly and things like that. So I thought that like my coming in that there was a lot that you could do with this role that maybe you don't see on screen very much. And I kind of wanted to try to define that for our game when I came into it.
Yeah, I mean, over in 5 years of playing this game, our flight controllers, of course, Al's been our number one flight controller, now promoted to first officer. But I really saw kinship with engineering, because the engineer's trying to hold the ship together, and the flight controller is always trying to figure out how they can push it to its limit and get the most out of it, really even using power. Like, give me more power. I love the rule, I've mentioned it before, where if you want to increase power to any, or you can spend power to make it so that if you spend like 3 power on something and it increases the complication range, when you roll on something, it gives you bonus momentum, kind of like you're really pushing the ship to its limits. And I love that idea that really your flight controller, if you're playing the flight controller, you need to be testing out the limits of that vessel, what it can do, and be begging for power, because sometimes you're going to have to pull off a maneuver and 5 dice may not cut it. You may actually need some momentum. And so you may need to beg Scotty for, give me everything into the impulse engines for this tight turn. So to me, it's a really exciting thing to play. And I've noticed that the person who plays the flight controller with us also, they can run engineering if they have to, because they know the ship, and kit bashing and all that kind of stuff when necessary to get the most out of their vessel. So I found it very exciting, very Han Solo, to borrow from another franchise.
And the roll ability really plays into that as well, right? Like the fact that you can use conn instead of engineering to try to identify some problems with the engines and things like that, because when your port thrusters are off by 2% because you're making corrections and it's overcorrecting, So calling that out to engineering, I think, is really, really fun. And being able to use your navigational sensors and whatnot to help, inform the crew what might be wrong with the ship, I think is really fascinating.
Well, so now I want to ask Sky and Al and Jim, if you played a flight controller before, what your most memorable moment was. I mean, you must have exciting stories to tell if you've done stuff. So give us like 30 seconds to 60 seconds on what your most death-defying or interesting flight scenario was. Sky, why don't you start?
I did an Immelman in an Odyssey class starship.
Sweet. Okay, educate the people who don't know flight.
An Immelman is basically it's a split S, but the reverse. So it's when you go from straight and level, and then you turn the ship, and then you cruise away, like in the opposite direction. But I did that because we had a Borg cube hot on our tail. There was a spatial rift right behind us, and I was gunning it to that spatial rift. Mm-hmm. And I pushed her to, right at the last second, just woof, so that the cube would go woof through that spatial rift, and there was all this space debris on the other side.
Nice. I see. That's awesome. See, what I really love about it
was great. It was awesome.
And since you're a pilot too, I mean, this is awesome that you can call out these maneuvers. Like, I would love that if it's somebody I'm playing with. Like, okay, show me what that is. Because I know when I punch up stuff like that, you'll usually see a little diagram with a picture of the maneuver, right? So that's so
cool. And I wish I had those little like planes on stick from Top Gun, like, because then it would make it easier because my hands are so big. But an Immelman's basically an inverted split S.
Mm-hmm. Scott, I'm going to ask you to do something for continuing missions. I'm going to ask you separate articles for each type of maneuver and what the attribute discipline or gated challenge or linear challenge would look like to pull that off, including how much power you have to pull from the engines to do that. I would love to make that a series.
A lot of power. Well, Because, well, for the Odyssey, it's not the thrusters necessarily, because once you get her going, she's fast. It's the inertial dampers, because she's huge. She's a 2,500 strong crew. So she's
yeah. And so you have to add, like, if there's complications to scale, we'll talk offline. But I think we need to make this a cool continuum, because I think that would jazz me up if I was a flight controller. And I don't really know how to, but I can look at all these maneuvers to pull off. Because I know we have the Picard maneuver and the Riker maneuver up there, but I would love real traditional Air Force maneuvers. That would be fun.
Yeah, dogfighting is not really something starships do, but it's space. You know, the only real enemy in space is inertia and momentum. So, you know, you've got a large ship. She's a large mass. So it takes, you know, a lot of force to get her going. But when she's going, okay.
Now I'm excited. This is great.
Yeah, that's an episode that we'll have. That's an episode we'll need Sky and Thomas Maroney for sure. Because I think the two of you going back and forth, we can just sit back and watch.
Okay, we'll get some in the queue. We'll get it started. Sky, get them on continuing missions, and then we'll talk. We'll break it down with people. We'll probably find some animations of real ships or real planes doing it that we could stream into it. That'd be awesome. Al, what about you? What's the coolest maneuver your character pulled off?
So we had been sucked into this layer of subspace that was just filled with plasma, and we couldn't go to warp, and the impulse drive was down. As we got sucked in, it got damaged, and there were these two-dimensional beings that were chasing us, and we couldn't move. We were dead in the water. So I called down to the flight deck and told them to open the doors and magnetize the shuttles right there in front of the doors. And we kind of used that to get a little bit of momentum. We steered the ship using the shuttles out of the flight deck. That was a lot of fun.
Brilliant. And mind you,
that's cool.
And mind you, he was so desperate because I had 41 threat in the queue at that time. I remember that. That's my 41 threat day that I talk about. Yeah. And that was, and I'll give homage to the module written by Tony Pye, which is a mission brief that you could look up on continuing missions, where it's a very scary module with thin stars. Just Google or just search thin stars in the search bar. What about you, Jim? Flight controller or any cool maneuver you remember in a game?
It wasn't exactly a maneuver in the sense that Sky and Al are talking about. But so back in the day, before STA, my group and I played a homebrew, because at the time we didn't like FASA and we didn't love Last Unicorn Games, and Decipher hadn't come out yet. So this is, way back in the day. And we didn't actually have a flight controller player character, but we had basically the equivalent of supporting characters, right? So just because, if our characters weren't doing something, we would just pick up an NPC and play them instead. And so we were on a mission to and I'm trying to remember the details. We were on a mission to evacuate a planetoid that was in the oncoming wake of a spatial anomaly of some sort that was going to destroy everything and everybody on the moon. And we figured out over the course of the episode that if we got the ship too close, it would be destroyed as well, right? So we were like, what the hell are we going to? How are we going to get all these people off the planetoid onto our ship without risking the ship? And so myself as flight controller and then a couple of the other player characters, we figured out, well, why don't we take the shuttles and string the shuttles along at the maximum possible distance from each other to where we could start beaming people and do like a relay from shuttle to shuttle to shuttle, and then to the ship.
Cool.
And so the flight controller, that we did basically the equivalent of an extended task, where we had the flight controllers working with the engineers to figure out how is this possible that we can actually make this work and keep everybody in the buffer and keep the buffer stream consistent from shuttle to shuttle, and how do we work with the science officer to make sure that all the shuttles are in the right position and aligned in such a way that we can do this without getting caught up in the whole spatial anomaly stuff. So I was the lead flight controller, if I remember right. And then some of the other players who weren't involved got to play some of the pilots. So we had we cleared the deck. I think we had 8 non-player character names for every department. and we used every single pilot we had on our sheet. We were like, okay, we made up these 8 names. We've never used them, so let's use them all now. We had like crewman this and crewman that, and petty officer this and petty officer that. The whole flight team got accolades that episode because we made it work. And
isn't that amazing?
It was just a neat idea to have like this consistent transporter beam from the planetoid to the ship, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and all the different pilots maintaining their individual ships. And I mean, it made for a visual in our head.
Yeah, and this is the thing that video game people will not understand. It's like, yes, it takes steps. Yes, it takes more time than pew, pew, pew video games. But the memories that come from pulling off these stunts, I've only seen in a TTRPG. I mean, my favorite, when I think about just ships going crazy, and I was just so amazed at the piloting, was the fleet battle involving cause dragons. So that we have this species that was created by one of our players, and they actually flew bioorganic dragons that bonded with them symbiotically. And so our crew had actually teamed up with them to take out the enemy squadron and some Romulans.
Dragon Riders of Pern.
Yeah, basically, exactly. Oh, you remember Anne McCaffrey taking it back? Oh my goodness, classic. Yeah, so basically think that, right? So it was so amazing, and everyone was just like at the end of the battle crying and exhausted, and we were just so cheering. I mean, really, the ship was flying apart at that point. But I couldn't believe that after we were done playing, everyone was like, we need time just to marinate on this. This was one of the most epic cosmic battles we've ever been a part of. So again, to the point, a video game can't give you that. But as a flight controller in Star Trek Adventures, you can become a hero pretty quickly.
Yeah. Just a quick non sequitur because you mentioned it, and it is actually related. Speaking of Dragon Riders of Pern, it's long out of print. But if you are a fan of the series, of Anne McCaffrey's series, see if you can track down a copy of the book called The Dragon Lover's Guide to Pern. It was a hardback when it first came out. It might have come out in softcover, but in that book, what's that?
My mom has it.
Oh, yeah, your mom has it. Perfect. I've got a copy on my shelf. But in that book, Anne McCaffrey's son wrote a whole section about flight tactics on how the dragons would attack the thread and different maneuvers they would do and different places they would fly in. And like that stuff is gold for this kind of a role. So like, pull resources from wherever you can find them. But this is probably the least expected place you would think to find it would be. So find yourself a copy of The Dragon Lover's Guide to Pern. I don't remember who wrote it.
I just found the paper. It's written by Jody Lynn Nye.
Oh, of course, Jody Lynn Nye. Yeah. Fantastic science fiction fantasy author.
Where's HBO here?
Oh, wouldn't that be amazing? Why have they not?
Oh, so cool! Like the thread coming down and getting the dragons, and the dragons getting burned up. Oh, it's a perfect series. I mean, HBO especially because there's some really awkward. Like consent stuff going on and sexual issues and stuff that would be really probably doesn't play well in this day and age, but I'm sure HBO
rewritten. Anything could be rewritten. Well, and again, look at this. This is just coming off talking about flight controllers and what they can do. Right. Now, I want to expand on something though, because we've seen it happen in our game, and let's expand our mind about what a navigator can do and what navigation means. Okay, so put that out there and talk to us about what you feel navigation means. I mean, are you really stuck behind the chair? Right. But in game terms, where could players take this? Sky, what do you think?
Okay, so if I'm kind of going off of like what navigators actually are, because flight engineers back in the day when I think it was like the 70s, 80s, that era of aviation, and before that in the golden age, they did all the fuel burn calculations. They did a lot of the navigation calculations, wind resistance, all sorts of that kind of stuff. So a lot of the calculations that go into flying, because flying is different from navigation. So when you make a flight plan, that's, and then, you have your headings, you have all of that. That's the navigation piece of it. That's like where the math happens. And then, flying is much more like procedural. There's checklists. There's, like you don't go past this speed. You don't do this. You have to do it this way. And that's what a lot of flying is. So the navigation really is the kind of like the flight planning, the fuel burn, the kind of the nuts and bolts of the flight and the phases of flight. So
Jim, I'm loving this.
So let me
I'm not pitching anything, but Sky, pitch that in a story, a flight controller, and especially if that was Enterprise era. I'm sorry, I'd be addicted to playing that one.
That's why I'm writing an Enterprise era right now.
Yeah, and there's more to talk about. But Al, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say that when I look at navigation, I don't just it's knowing where you are in three-dimensional space, right? Does that mean that it's necessarily just where your ship is? No, I would apply that to like if you're lost on a planet and your shuttle is broken down and you need to find your way to a location, I would argue that conn is the stat you would use to try to get there, right? To try to figure out how to navigate across this vast wilderness, if you will. And I think that lots of times people see that term conn and think it's just piloting a ship. But I think that three-dimensional awareness and reasoning also comes into play. So if you're on an away mission or you're stuck on a planet, make some conn rolls, see if you can figure out where you're going.
Okay. What about keep on the same train? Yeah. Navigating space in Star Trek has gone beyond 3 dimensions. Mm-hmm. And there's multiple realities. There's navigating time through temporal mechanics. There's navigating the mind. There's all these things that can be navigated. And I know I've written stories and some have been published about different things that a conn officer might actually be able through intuition. And I like the way Sky was talking about the mathematics involved, that this person might be able to make some leaps and think beyond 3 dimension.
That's part of the reason why I love playing conn as a betazoid.
Oh yeah, there you go. Navigating the mind, right?
Because part of how because people are, betazoids, they're empathic, they understand, they're great diplomats. And while yes, my character became a diplomatic powerhouse as a captain, as a conn officer, she was very much she was super intuitive of where she was in space, and where her crewmates' heads were at, and kind of just her betazoidness allowed her to have an awareness of the ship and be able to hold space for the calculations and everything in her head that a human might not necessarily be able to do. So, and my GM loved that. So.
Yep. Also seeing people use, I'll just say one last thing on the same vein. Don't forget transporter. I was actually kind of surprised in the book when it says transport is I think reason plus engineering feat. It oftentimes, I think, should be conn in a lot of situations when you're trying to locate someone and get coordinates and beam them to the right spot. That feel free, use conn instead of engineering to affect transporters. Sorry, Jim.
Well, yeah, it would go back to that engineering overlap, right? Mm-hmm. And my conn officer, part of her backstory was that she was a test pilot, and so test pilots have to be engineers.
Right.
So engineering was when she was a conn officer, engineering was her second strongest stat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think as a player, it just think about what your character's strengths are, and be willing to think outside the box. So if you're like you're saying, Michael, if you say, oh, this is a reason plus engineering task, if you're the flight officer or the flight controller, and you're like, well, you know what, if I approach this problem in a certain way, I think I can justify using conn instead, and then go on the technobabble spiel and make it work. So yeah, I think that's a great opportunity for a player to be willing to take the reins a little bit and say, look, I think this because it should be a give and take, right? It shouldn't be the game master just dictating what what it should be. You have a player, you have agency, so take advantage of it. Your character better than your game master probably. One of the things I want. Oh, go ahead, Michael.
No, I was going to say, and sometimes, remember, it could also replace security. I'm thinking about, for instance, if you're on the ground in a survival and you're pitted against Klingons who are hunting you down or trying to find the Romulans, conn can be used as security to be like, this is the most advantageous route. These are some things I noticed along the way that we could use as defense, cover, attack, natural elements. So again, really encouraging players, think outside the box about somebody who would have conn would be trained in various situations.
Yeah, I mean, and just as we've been talking, we've talked about how the conn officer can interface with so many of the other key characters, right? The engineer, the scientist, the operations officer, even the command staff, right? Science, the security officer too. I mean, there's so many ways that you could connect with the other bridge crew in meaningful ways that have nothing to do with the mechanics of the game, right? Just role playing potential. There's a lot of stuff to do, even if you're the pilot assigned to be on the away team to pilot the shuttle, right? Or beam down to the planet. I mean, that's something we haven't talked about yet. Is the instant value that you bring to every away team, right? Is there going to be a shuttle? You're on the shuttle. Guess what? Ding! You're all set. You're good to go. You don't have to worry about being left behind or anything. One thing I wanted to mention, and this tied into some of the other conversations, is if you think about the classic Age of Sail, right? All those young midshipmen were put on the ships with the captains and the first officers and all the other lieutenants, and they were drilled every day on navigation using sextants and the sun and figuring out where are you in the world, because you're out there on that gigantic ocean all by your lonesome. You didn't have technology other than what you had on the ship with you. And if you couldn't figure out where you were screwed. Like, you were seriously screwed. And the master of the ship would be like, what the hell is this guy doing? He's not the captain. He shouldn't be the captain. So one of the things I love to do when there's a flight officer is to, it's classic, right? You take the technology away and you force them to come up with what are they going to do without that technology to lean on. And it's like, okay, so you're the conn officer and all the primary ship systems are down. You've got to navigate out of this hazardous nebula or whatever. How are you going to do it? It's like, well, you literally got to look out the window and grab your sextant. Where am I in the world? And start figuring out the math and stuff and get your science officer to help you.
That's so fun.
And what I like about that too, I think I've talked before about biomimetics.
Yeah.
There's creatures in nature that navigate with senses humans do not have, and beyond the sensors that even a spaceship would have. So my wife was just reading a book. I wish I knew the name of it, but it's about all the extra senses that creatures have that we don't. And believe me, it is now going to be one of my best Star Trek books to reference. It's like, I'm going to be pulling a lot of this into writing. So if you are a flight controller, study that. How do blind animals navigate? Bats, all the different ways that creatures without eyes, ears, smell navigate. Ooh, you would be possibly a master of that, right?
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of cool stuff. I'm sorry, what was that, Sky?
Also a Betazoid thing, as I was saying before.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen so many examples on the shows about different cosmozoans, like flying the space eddies and we've had that conversation before where you take real life concepts and you translate them into space with the technobabble. There could be the equivalent of a hurricane in space, and as a navigator or flight controller, you got to figure out what pattern is the disruption going in, and how can I navigate the ship in such a way to help that. So I mean, there's just so much cool stuff that you can do with space and just making stuff up and making it sound realistic.
One of the things that I do like about the position as well is the talent selection that has been written into the game is so really it's super thematic, and most of them don't come up very often. But when they do, it's like you are showing that you are the best of the best flying your ship. I highly recommend trying some of these. When's this ever going to arise? Because when it does, you're going to feel like a superhero.
That's an interesting point.
Time, I used push the limits. Ooh, boy, that was great.
You raise an interesting point, Al, and I think I want to get your collective insights on this. Let me get my thoughts together. Star Trek Adventures is interesting in that everybody gets to pick, 4 talents, or 4 special rules. And you're right. Oftentimes those talents might not come up that frequently. I think of a game like, I remember D&D 4th edition, right? Where you pick your feats. Like those feats were probably guaranteed to be used every time you got into a fight. So you weren't feeling like you were wasting a feat slot on particular things. But I have heard some chatter on various STA sites about how you don't want to waste the talent on these cool things for your role that may not ever come up that often. And my thought is wait a minute now. You're a player. Talk to your game master. Say, I picked these cool talents for a reason. I want to see these in my game. Don't let me use it once every 10 episodes or something. Make it a regular ongoing thing somehow. So, have that conversation with your game master and your group and say, look, I'm going to be playing the flight officer, first of all, which means, we're going to be kind of slanting some story ideas toward wanting to do more flight type of stuff. But I was just
totally. I want to agree on that. No, I totally want to agree with that. I think one of the talents that Al's character had was covering advance. And I don't know if they have them anymore, but I remember I designed a game with Piers Buckley's the burning. Oh, yeah. I remember that was the one fighting the colic in there. And I was like, this is the perfect place. Finally, we're going to have a little fleet battle here, a small mini fleet battle. And okay, I'm going to say that it was a standstill by the end of the battle, but when it was used in conjunction with the main ship and the shuttles, I was like, this is kind of devastating. And it really kept them alive. So to your point, Jim, covering advanced, people may think well, that's not really cool. I'm not in a lot of fleet battles. And so if you're the game master, create a little battle and give the chance for the character to shine. What do you two think, Al, Sky? Yeah.
I'm all about flavor and story. So that, when you're building a character, sure, you might want to lean towards taking bold or cautious in whatever department you're in. But I would say, I think your story is going to be much more interesting if you've got those unique talents. And when they come into play, you're going to be so much more excited and you're going to be that much more connected to the game than just saying, oh, well, I'm going to buy a D20 and get a reroll. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. That's just who I am as a role player. I do the same thing with focuses, right? I like to have a couple of broad ones, but then I like to have these really, really narrow ones because, the one time when playing the tuba comes into play, it just makes everything more robust and more that much more character driven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I bet when you put those really, I don't want to say esoteric, but when you put those really narrow specific focuses on your sheet and your game master actually pulls that thread, right? I mean, that's for me personally as a player, that's heaven, because that's my game master is actually paying attention to some extent on what's on my sheet and what my character is and what my character can do, and isn't just throwing his or her own plot stuff at us and we're reacting to it all the time. There's actually some synergy there. And I think, as a game master, not to put more work on you, but really you are there. And I'm going to channel Sam here, Sam Delev, who was on the show a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to channel her and say, as a game master, as a fellow player at the table, you are there to facilitate an awesome experience for your other players. And so anything you can do to enhance that is going to be a win. And one of the best ways to do it is to look at your players' character sheets. If they bring a history to the game, if they've taken the effort outside of the game to create a history for their character and they bring that along, pick through it. Find some cool stuff in there, but definitely look at their focuses, look at their talents, and give them opportunities to be awesome on the show. Because we see that every week on the show. All the lead characters, right? All the lead actors they're contractually obligated to have cool moments, but so are we, right? We show up week after week to the game, so give us cool stuff to do. Don't make us just, like Al said, don't make us spend momentum just to roll another D20 or something. That's boring. Let me do something cool with my character, right?
And Operations Command Book have amazing add-on talents in there. Besides the focuses one could create, I know one of my favorite. One was that's my favorite that I discovered in the operations manual was exploiting engineering flaw. Go look that up, people. Go look at what that does, and it makes the conn officer. I mean, if they have to fire a photon torpedo, they are going to be kick butt with the exploit engineering flaw, which we see on Star Trek all the time. Sky, did you have a favorite talent that
Yeah, so I talked about push the limits before, and I think we actually tailored that one a little bit down because of our setting. Because I think the way that the talent actually works is like, okay, there's like something in the natural environment in space that is affecting your ability to fly or navigate, and this is and then this talent basically, like, I don't remember exactly how it was, but it basically makes it moot. But we expanded that focus a little bit, that purview, to also include a few other circumstances, just so that there was other things that, like, I could use it for, kind of along the same vein, not like it was not significantly different or anything, just kind of something where it's like, okay, there can be different scenarios where this can be used. Like if you're in atmosphere, we did one where we went in water, we went into the ocean with the ship, and we went straight down to the depths, and I guess you could technically consider this a natural environment, but I used push the limits to keep the ship going down as far as we needed to go.
Cool.
So I really liked that talent whenever I got to use it. I'm gonna say, Al, I was boring. I really liked my cautious conn, which is funny because my character's role model, well, not just role model, but mentor, was Tom Paris. So cool. But she was definitely like cut from similar but different cloth.
Yeah, I've been going and reading through. I'm in the 4th book of the Vanguard novel, and in the 3rd book, they pulled the underwater maneuver with the USS Sagittarius, which was so cool. But as I've been reading the Starship maneuvers in there, I'm like, oh, how would this play out in Star Trek Adventures? I'm like, what would be the mechanics behind this? Such a good series. All right. One other thing I was thinking about that you can do with a conn officer is navigating through Jeffrey's tubes in a security manner. Like, the ship again and getting through and maybe befuddling enemies who've taken over the ship. Conn could be a really good one for mapping that out and building a tactical strategy for the crew. I can go on all day.
I know my ship, but for conn officers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One other thing that I was thinking of, Michael, you actually touched on this. Is not thinking so much about your ship, but thinking about all the other ships, right? So maybe you're a conn officer who is really studied up on all of your adversary opponents, right? Maybe the Starfleet equivalent of the Janes manuals for all the different aircraft that are out there. Like maybe you studied extensively on Romulan space frames or Cardassian space frames or alien space frames or whatever, and you could be, on the edge of a conflict with another ship, and you could be just your knowledge and your insight could be like, that ship is listing just a little bit to port. I think there's something wrong with its aft RCS thruster quad or something like that. Mm-hmm. And that could be an advantage that you could pick up on if your captain ends up getting into a scrap with this ship. You can use that to your advantage or something.
I love that.
I do too. I've done stuff like that, and it's amazing. I love it.
Well, I want to add on to something that Sky had said too with Jim, with what you're saying now is, remember Sky mentioned that they went and adapted the talent to suit their character. And so what you're talking about, Jim, is write that talent, somebody. If you like what Jim's saying right now, write that talent where other ships' tolerances, you know their breaking point or something. I think that would be a great boon to any crew.
Yeah, I mean, I just think about, I'm pulling this right out of Top Gun, right? Where those pilots get all the intel, right? And they spend so much time studying what are the capabilities of our adversaries' fighter craft, right? What can they do? Sometimes they manage to get one, right? They manage to acquire one from one way or another, or they get the intel on it, and they're like, oh, well, we can actually get hands on stick time, right? And fly it around and get a feel for like, this is how this ship how this craft operates. If we're going to be fighting this craft, here's what we can do to take advantage of it. Maybe certain, like, I don't know, Sky, you know the technical details better than I do. Mm-hmm. Some flight frames have different turn radiuses and tolerances at
absolutely
speeds. and different altitudes that you can manage, and like that can translate very easily into space. You just make up the technobabble, and a conn officer would be really well suited to know that stuff.
So a good example would be the MiG-15 versus the F-4 Phantom in Vietnam. The MiG-15 was very maneuverable, like side to side this way. So you did not want to get in a turning fight with a MiG-15 in an F-4 because it was very heavy. It was very big. It was an interceptor more than it was a fighter. So what the F-4s would do is they would use their bigness and those big old engines on there, and they would do vertical, climbs and dives to meet up with these MiGs who are trying to squirrel away from them, but they're using their bigness and their momentum, their weight to maneuver in a different way that works for the F4, doesn't work for the MiG, because the MiG is using maneuvers for the F4.
I love this. Guy, we've got to translate you into making the ultimate conn book for.
So if we ever do a book on the Dominion War, because I think the Dominion War is probably the one that was best suited to show big fleet engagements and like different scales of starships getting into all the banking and stuff. Now, of course, DS9 was fortunate in that CGI technology was getting good to the point where they were able to do some of that dynamic stuff with especially in the later seasons with some of those space battles, and that's where you could start, really bringing some of this stuff into it. And I think that'd be really cool to figure out how to translate that into a game sort of thing without getting too down into the weeds about the mechanics.
Well, I think we're going to have another episode, Sky, at some point, just about flight maneuvering. And like Jim said, we're going to invite Thomas, and we're going to geek out on what you can do with your ship. Okay. I can't believe we've been at this for almost an hour. Well, almost an hour, almost 45 minutes now at this point. So let's do a go around and talk a little bit more about, why pick the flight controller. Let's start with Al, because you have probably the most on what you may want to add on it since you wrote the chapter.
Yeah, I think that it's funny when you're looking online at the game and what people are talking about, how there's always people looking for games like, what do we do for our medical officers? Well, right underneath there, it's like, well, what do I do for my conn officer? I find that such a fascinating question, because as a conn officer, I felt like I was always doing stuff. I was in almost every scene. I felt like I was always an integral part of a story. So I guess as a game master, creating those opportunities, whether it's by piloting to an away mission, or giving the opportunity to have some type of combat encounter or whatever, that's really important. But also as a player, you have a lot of tools that apply to things beyond your little console, right? Beyond your joystick. You have, you've got you can help in engineering. You can, you can help in astrometrics. There's so many things that you can do. Go out there and make yourself part of the story. Right? Like, sure, you might not be that hot shot center of attention, that's, surfing the edge of a black hole, but you can still be an integral part of the story because your character has stuff that applies everywhere. So as a GM, don't stress if you can't specifically make something for your conn officer. Just give them opportunities to interact with the other characters. There was one time when there was a bit of a ruckus happening in engineering and our chief engineer wasn't on the ship. I went down there and pulled everyone back together, and rallied them around fixing, the warp core. So go out there, make yourself part of the story, because you will be integral no matter where you go.
I love that. I'm gonna go next because I want Sky and Jim to have the last words, because Sky, I think, might have some of the most insightful stuff too. I want to add on to Al talking about making the story. When you're flying through space and a battle occurs, I would think that the navigator, the flight controller, would be aware of what's around them. So asking questions to the game master, like, is there a place for cover? What kind of spatial anomalies are around? How far are they? And then really working that into a battle strategy, even if you're in retreat and have to hide behind, a ring of a Saturn or something. But if you're picking this character, close your eyes and think three-dimensionally and picture space. And if you need help, go onto YouTube and type in relaxing space scenes. And you'll get all these weird vistas and stuff. And to be like, okay, I want to go hide in that pocket of nebulous gas. And what kind is it? Will it protect us? And make them do a roll. The game master do a roll on what kind of nebula it is. But look for cover. Look for places that you can take advantage, going back to how Sky destroyed that Borg cube with that spatial rip. You get into the mud of space. I know that sounds weird, but make it physical, because that'll really show that you are mastering the tapestry that's out there for you to help weave a good story. Scott?
Yeah. So it's interesting that you bring that up, because of those two background things, I did mentored and I also did special commendation. And special commendation was on my character's first assignment, 6 months out of the academy. She was like the third string conn officer. We don't know how she got there, but because she was like Nova Squadron captain and all that. So we don't know how she got there. But so she was doing a shift on Alpha Shift on the bridge, filling in for the science officer. She gets her degrees in astrophysics. And when the Breen come out of nowhere and they attack the ship, the shields are down, the weapons are down, the conn officer is knocked out. She sees all of this and the captain is dead. The first officer takes command and she runs to the conn. She throws, the unconscious conn officer off the helm, and she starts going, because she'd seen on the, the displays, all the science data coming in, that there is I don't know if you remember the Next Gen episode where they had the black cluster, where it was having their shields up that actually was destroying them in this anomaly, but basically a more aggressive form of that anomaly, 30 seconds away at full impulse. And, the tactical officer is like, no, we need to get weapons back online. We need to fire back. And my character's like, no, we have no shields. We have no weapons. We need to go in there. And the tactical officer is like, are you insane? We don't have any shields. And they're like, trust me, no shields is good in there. For them, it's going to be bad. They're going to follow us in there. And so so the first officer is like, okay, we're going with what you're saying. And she takes them into that black cluster, and the Breen ships are destroyed. And they're fine because their shields are down.
So know your spatial anomalies.
Yes, know your spatial anomalies.
So grab that conn book, the science book, the Utopia Policia book.
And I think the thing about the conn officer is that you have so many times, and probably even more so than the captain, to be the quote unquote big damn hero. You really do. So if you want to have those really cool moments, the conn officer, is probably right behind the tactical officer in terms of, or even on par with the tactical officer in terms of those things.
Got me excited. Jim.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, I think we covered the gamut here of all the little notes that I wanted to make about it. Again, not to be a shill, but check out the command source book. I put a lot of thoughts in there about the conn role and command role. I still think conn is one of the best roles to play, because there's so many places that you can go with it. There's so many different directions you can go. Especially, I think this is something we didn't really touch on. I think it's a good role for someone who's not that familiar with Star Trek. Mm-hmm. It gives you a chance to do something cool and be involved with everybody, and it gives you a chance to learn. What does an engineer do? What does an operations officer do? What does a scientist do? What does the command officers do? And if you're newer to Star Trek and you're newer to the game, it gives you a chance to be patient, right? And think about, okay, now I can start thinking about my career path. Do I want to go toward command? Do I want to go toward engineering? Like Geordi, right? Geordi was a conn officer and immediately became chief engineer. Look at that. And now I think he's a captain now, or somewhere in the lore, he became a captain. again, we threw a ton of ideas in this episode about ways that you can connect with all the other roles all over the ship. Plenty of opportunities for you to do every away team mission, whether you're on a shuttle or you're just beaming down, because you're going to be the smart one who can find your way if you get lost, right? So I mean, there's just a wealth of potential for a flight controller, conn officer, helmsman, whatever you want to call it. That the more I think about it over the last couple of years, having done the player's guide with Al, and then just thinking through it, is like, oh man, I really want to I want to play like a junior officer for once. But forget being the captain or the first officer. I've done that. I want to be a junior officer and like get into the weeds and like be the Paris, right? And just really get, or Detmer even, like get my hands dirty, doing cool stuff with the ship and everything. So I just have fun with it more than anything else.
Sweet.
You can also be a lieutenant commander and be conn officer. I was.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we even Worf sat at conn sometimes. Again, as a tactical role, if you think about that. So amazing, really great. I mean, the good thing about Star Trek, we're going to say in the shows, they're inconsistent enough that you could do whatever you want with your game.
Yeah, I mean, look at Dax, right? Dax was the science officer, and she piloted the Defiant more often than not. So be willing to take that talent where you can play multiple roles, right? And be the science officer and the flight controller. Why not? Pair those up in interesting ways.
All right. Well, it's that time of the show again where we go into gratitude. I like doing it to the brick and mortars who, of course, are stocking those hard copies of the game. I finally opened up the deluxe edition Utopia Planitia and was thumbing through pages last night. I just couldn't resist it. Yeah. And I'm just like, there's still something about a hard copy book. I've read it 100 times in PDF, but the hard copy is just like, my wife's like, didn't you already read it? I'm like, yeah, but it's just different. So we got to get those brick and mortars, a shout out to them. Today, we are going to I'll shout out two. We got Shelby Cameron points out Adventures Underground in Richmond, Washington. And then we're going to take you all the way to Australia because Leon Peters Malone is calling out a store called Tactics, which is in St. George's Terrace, Perth. And the one I love about that is because Shelby Cameron, who had just quoted before, he said he visited that one in 1998, 2000, 2003, 2005. So Shelby's going around the world in order to visit Tactics in St. George's Terrace, Perth. Now, that's what you call a super fan right there. So why don't we go Al, Sky, and then we'll have Jim close it out for your gratitude.
Yeah, my gratitude goes out to WH Publications, their Twitch channel. They pulled me on to do a Learn to Play live stream of Star Trek Adventures. They had a blast. They've been messaging me every day, asking when we're playing again. So thank you for having me on, and hopefully we'll do some more Learn to Plays moving forward.
I watched the entire thing. I was on vacation. My wife was still sleeping. And so I said, well, let me just put it on and watch it. And that was so fun to watch their excitement. And I'm going to shout you out too, because you gave away stuff for people to play at the end of it. And I just thought that was so awesome. So thank you, Al, for promoting the game like that.
All right. Yeah. I want to again thank Nick at Cryptid for this awesome background and revamping the Enterprise F bridge. And then I also want to thank all of my flight instructors over the years, all of my professors and teachers who have indulged my obsession with all things flight and space and stuff. So that kind of make it possible for me to talk about these things in a Star Trek context. So definitely.
I want to pick your brain.
Yes, please.
Well, I was on mute. Sorry. Awesome. That's fantastic. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't even know who to thank. I want to thank everybody involved in like navigation and nautical fiction and history and the space program and just all that stuff, and everybody like who created spaceships and the artists and the CGI people, just everybody involved in like making all that stuff happen, because all that stuff is soup in my head that comes out and gets inspired by conversations like this to make me think of all these great ideas that could happen in Star Trek and in space. and just adding that technobabble element to make it really cool, but still have that grounding in the history and the science, and to make it feel realistic for the genre. So just thanks to everybody there, and then of course thanks to Al for running that show. I was able to watch about an hour of it. Had a lot of fun. It sounded like everybody was really excited. I need to go back and watch the whole thing again, because I want to see how it ended. Because you guys were having so much fun, and I had to cut out. And then as always, thank you, Sky, for being here. You bring such a great perspective to it, and I just love the fact that you're a pilot. I mean, how perfect is that, right? So yeah, and then of course I can never say it enough, but thank you to all the fans, not just super fans like Sky, but all you casual fans out there who are trying out the game, playing the game, checking it out for the first time, or are curious about it and aren't sure you want to get into it. Give it a try, have fun, and yeah. So thank you to the fans. Again, without the fans, we wouldn't be doing this, going on 7-8 years now. So thank you for being there, and get ready for more cool stuff to come.
All right. To boldly go. That's what we do. So IDIC. Thank you, everybody.
Live long and prosper. Be safe. Be well. We'll talk to you next time.